You're listening to Art Affairs, episode number 8. Today I'll be talking to Adam Caldwell. Alright, so my name's Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. If this is your first time listening, Art Affairs is meant to give you a look at and into the new contemporary art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, printmakers, shining a spotlight on the human side of the wonderful work they do. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairs.podcast.com, and you can check out new episodes on all your favorite podcast platforms. Of course, if you like what I'm doing here, be sure to subscribe. And you can always connect with the show on Instagram and Facebook at Art Affairs Podcast. All right, so today's guest is painter Adam Caldwell. I was first exposed to Adam's work through the various group shows that he's participated in at ThinkSpace Gallery. Adam's work deals with some pretty powerful themes, ranging from war to the media to rampant consumerism, a subject matter that, at least to me, seems to be ever more present in social discourse today. But in addition to being a painter, Adam's also a teacher and has been teaching for quite a while in the Bay Area, and has several other pursuits. We dig into all of that and more, so I hope you enjoy my conversation with Adam Caldwell. Adam, welcome to the show, man. It's great to have you on.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about your background. You grew up, from what I understand, in the New England area, first in Maine and then eventually in Massachusetts. Was that near Boston?
Yeah, a little outside of Boston. I moved around a lot. I lived in Maine, various places in Massachusetts. I lived in Tennessee for 4 years, and I also lived in France for 2 years when I was like 10 to 12.
Oh, okay. What brought you out to France?
My mom thought it would be good for my sister and I to have a rich cultural experience and to get the hell out of the United States for a little while. See that it wasn't the only cultural game in town.
What kind of work did your parents do?
They're both teachers, and we didn't move around a lot until after my parents got divorced. And once they were divorced, my mom was a pretty vagabond, free-spirited type. So she kind of lugged us about the country and the planet for a while, which was good and bad. But it was it ended up being okay.
Right on. And from what I hear, now you got to tell me if this is true, you actually started drawing when you were like 1 or 2 years old?
I did, yeah. I was kind of obsessed with mark making. And, luckily for my mom, she could just give me a pen and a piece of paper, and I would just scribble for hours and hours. And by the time I was 3, I could start making pretty legible things, And then she said one day I drew Captain Hook from Peter Pan, and she could tell it was Captain Hook when I was like 4 years old or something.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What do you think it was that triggered that in you? Did you have people around you that were artistic?
Not really. I mean, I always liked watching my mom write, and she would do little drawings, of things. And, but there wasn't really a lot of art, making around me. I think it was mostly, I just really liked seeing the material come out of the implement, whatever it was. Like, I love seeing ink flow out of a pen because it was like something I was doing, It was like some kind of primal thing about I was making a mark and it was persisting after I did it, like I was making something.
What were some of your early artistic influences?
Comics, comics
Mm.
and more comics.
What was your favorite comic?
Well, the first one was my mother had three sisters, and they all collected 1950s, 1960s comics.
Okay.
So in my grandmother's house, there was a huge pile of comic books, like this giant stack that I was obsessed with. So I just read them over and over and over again. And they were like Little Lulu and like, weird, 1950s girls comics mostly, or kids comics. And I was obsessed with that. And then it was all Marvel, I mean, Batman was okay, but Marvel and Marvel is the real deal.
Yeah, I hear you. I was a big Spider-Man guy myself, so.
Me too. Spider-Man was the one I identified with, because he was sort of a kid, had problems. I got Spider-Man. The other ones were they were too far along in the game of life to really comprehend what they were up to.
And your grandfather, actually, I found this interesting. Your grandfather is Erskine Caldwell, who is an author that wrote a lot about like poverty and racism and social issues that he observed growing up in the South. What was your relationship like with your grandfather?
Distant. He was like a mythical being, sort of, in my life. Like I only met him a couple times.
Okay.
He and my father had a very strained relationship, mostly because like he took off and married. Sort of dumped my dad and my grandmother and went off to become a famous author. I met him. The one time I met him I met him when I was really young, but when I was older, we drove all the way to Florida. He came out from his office to eat lunch, and then as soon as lunch was over, he stood up and said, "Now it is time for you to leave."
Wow. It's very direct. Wow.
And went back into his office, and we left. And I was like, wow, okay.
Okay. I guess we got to go. That's amazing. And did you read much of his work?
I had a kid's book that he wrote when I was young that he'd given me, at some point. And I read that a lot. But his stuff is pretty racy. Like he was banned all over the place for obscenity.
Really?
Because he had a lot of sex and stuff going on in his books, and he was actually famous for that at the time. I've actually met old men who like used my grandfather's work as masturbatory material. Yeah, they outline the pages, and I was like, oh my god, that's weird.
Different times. Interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Were you a big reader growing up? I mean, in addition to comics, were you reading other types of books?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've always been a crazy, voracious reader.
What were some of your favorite authors?
Well, I mean, when I was really young, I remember reading like Jonathan Livingston Seagull and like Watership Down were the first like books I really read that kind of blew my mind. And before that it was all like Dr. Seuss and all that stuff. But then it was by the time I was like I think when I was 11, my aunt bought me Dune for Christmas, and I read Dune, and that was the end of it all. As soon as I read Dune, I just read science fiction for like 30 years,
And then ultimately after high school, you ended up moving to Oakland, right?
Yeah.
Completely across the country. What brought you out there?
Just to get away from everything, I'm gay, and I realized that my family was kind of too oppressive for me to come out at the time.
Okay.
Back in the 80s. So I got the hell out of there and came out here.
Yeah, right on. So was that the prime motivator for you moving out there?
Probably. Yeah, I had a couple friends who were out here, and I just wanted to get the hell out of wherever I was, But yeah, that was mostly it. And to smoke weed, too. That was the other prime motivator.
And whenever you moved out there, what kind of work were you doing?
Just restaurant work, mostly. Yeah, I worked in pizza. I worked at Blondie's Pizza in Berkeley, delivering pizzas for a long time. And different restaurant work, painting houses, trimming weed for people, during the growing season, at the harvest times. But just, really like vagabonding. Like I had absolutely no inclination to get like a real job or have a career or do anything but just play, really.
At what point did that change? What point did you decide you wanted to go to art school?
Yeah, 26, I saw 30 creeping around the corner, like rearing its ugly head. And I was like, oh my God, I gotta get everything together. So then I like completely, so the other instigator was like, I'd been like drinking a lot and partying, and I went back east, and my dad looked at me and he kind of shook his head and he's like, you're looking pussy, which means fat, That's it. And I was so mortified. I was like, oh my God, I'm fat, I'm out of shape. I'm a loser. That's all I had to say. And I literally quit drinking like at that moment for like 15 years.
Oh, wow. You turned your entire life around just because he called you pussy.
Yeah, he goes, he's like, you're looking a little pussy. And I was like, oh my God. So it was pretty funny. So I that's all I had to say because I respected my dad so much in his opinion. So I just like quit everything, went to community college for 2 years at Laney in Oakland. And then I applied to art school and I got like a $10,000 scholarship that was specifically from Laney College to that art school, which was really, was really cool for the first year. I basically paid most of my tuition and stuff.
Yeah. So you ended up going to California College of the Arts, right? I
did. Yep.
What was your major?
Well, first I wanted to do comics, of course. I thought I was going to do fully painted graphic novels that I wrote and made myself, which I started doing in school and stuff. It'd take me like 10 months to do one comic, and then I'd self-publish it. So I was doing anything I could do to figure that out. And then I took an oil painting class and smelled turpentine for the first time. And some primeval ancient kind of, impulse was released when you smell that, when you walk and smell turpentine, for the first time, that piney scent. No one uses terps anymore, but back then the oil painting place stunk of rich petrochemicals, So I started oil painting, and then I started studying illustration with Baron Story. Someone said you got to take a class with this guy Baron Story, and I did, and he's like a genius, He's one of the greatest teachers, so influential on so many amazing artists and comic book artists, and just one of the greatest draftsmen of all time. Yeah, maybe the seminal moment in my art life was that he walked into class one day with this giant bag full of his sketchbooks, which are these famous things. He's got hundreds of them. Like every single page is unbelievably detailed and researches topics and just this endless like maze of art and literature and investigation. Yeah, so I studied illustration for a long time. So I kind of had a double major with fine art. Actually, I had to write I had to write a request to have a major that was split between fine art and illustration.
Wow. What did you, were you still like by the end of your college career, were you still wanting to do comics or had your interest shift?
No, I thought I was going to do illustration. And then in the middle, sort of in my junior year, I guess, one of my teachers, who's a really amazing illustrator and storyboard artist, had this giant storyboard project. And he's like, walked into class, he's like, I can't finish this. I got too much work. Do you want to have this job? So he gave me this job doing storyboards. And that's what I did for the next 5 years.
Okay. But you didn't stick with it?
Well, it was good. I was still working at a restaurant, and then I started teaching at the Academy of Art part-time, and I was doing storyboards. and that was all good. But there was some very unfulfilled thing that I wasn't accomplishing, and I finally realized I needed to do oil painting and do fine art.
Okay.
Yeah, it was traumatic though. It was like a real breakdown to get to that point. It was like not an easy thing to figure out.
Yeah, it sounds like a journey. You mentioned teaching. That's something that I wanted to ask you about. What is it about teaching that interested you so much?
Well, I've been doing different types of teaching for a long time. I do martial arts is sort of another huge part of my life, and I, when you do martial arts and you start to get belts, you start teaching lower belts stuff. Like they'll be like, okay, take these guys over here and show them the second form that that they don't know. And I was like 12 and I was teaching like 30-year-olds like stuff, which is really great experience. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I've been teaching martial arts for a long time and running like some kickboxing classes and stuff. So I was experienced with that, but it was also just having money, getting money and opportunity. Yeah.
That's something you still do today, right? You said you're still teaching at the Academy of Arts?
I do. Yeah. I teach full time.
What subjects?
I teach, I basically teach 2 classes, and it's pretty, the reason I do it is because I can just walk in and teach these classes without preparing anything. I've got everything set up because I've done it so many times. But it's basically figure drawing is one class, which is just great because then I just show up and I've got nude models, I've got art materials, I've got a room set up with lights, and I get to draw. I mean, not the whole time, of course. I have to help the class, but I get to draw every day for at least a couple hours.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then I teach charcoal rendering too, like a rendering class. So the 2 basic drawing classes.
Okay. Very cool. And are you able to keep up with the students that you've taught over the years and watch as their own kind of careers progress?
I do to some extent, but I'm not in their major. So I'm not like involved in their later development in school. I just kind of, get them going, But yes, there's many students that I'm totally still in contact with, I write them recommendation letters, and then, then I see them years later and see what they're up to.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. In one of your bios, I read something that really resonated with me and I wanted to ask you about. You said that one of the most important areas of inspiration is the community of artists that you surround yourself with. And so I wanted to see what is your involvement with the artist community? Is there a rich community there in the Bay Area?
There is, and it's tough right now. San Francisco is increasingly difficult to live in as an artist. People are getting kicked out. One of my friends, Brett Emery, is this amazing artist, and he is like, all these pot growers are buying it's not just tech. All these pot growers are buying all of the warehouses and kicking artists out.
Wow.
Yeah. He's in this big litigation against this big pot growing company. So there's this rich sort of community that's being eroded by capitalism.
Wow, and it used to be tech, and now it's pot growers.
Well, because they're taking over the warehouses in the shitty neighborhoods now, where all the artists have been forced to squat, for the last 10 years. Yeah, but it's still happening. It's not quite as connected as it was. There used to be like a pretty, I'm also a little older now, so like we're not all out, every night like hanging out like we used to. But yeah, there's a really beautiful group of a lot of artists who sort of came up together, and there's a lot of really great galleries in San Francisco, and everybody supports each other, Do you have the opportunity to attend many exhibitions yourself? Yeah, I try to go out once a week if I can. Yeah, I usually try to go out every Friday or Saturday night. And there's usually at least one thing happening with someone that I know. on one of those nights, sometimes more. I mean, it used to be I'd have to go to 3 or 4 exhibits every weekend to keep up with all my friends.
Who are some of the artists that inspire you today?
Well, Brett Emery is one of my favorite artists. He and I like have had exhibits together for like 10 years, and he just sort of stopped everything and went to Stanford for 2 years. He went to get an MFA at Stanford, so I respect that a lot, and I'm jealous because I really wish I could stop everything and go to school for 2 years, and just focus on my work. David Chong Lee is also like one of my favorite artists. We used to share a studio space together, and those are people I know. And there's sort of a whole group of sort of realist painters who are just exploring different ways of making realistic painting relevant in the modern world. Too numerous to mention, but there's just so many good young painters out there. I mean, I can't even keep up with them. Every time I go on Instagram, it's just like, oh my God, they're all so good and they're working so hard. It's amazing,
Let's talk a little bit about the mediums that you work in. You mentioned oil paints, and other than the smell of turpentine, what is it about oils that you find so attractive?
I mean, everybody's going to say something like this who's an oil painter, that, I can't use acrylics. There's, oil paint has this mythical quality of richer color, and the feeling of applying oil paint is more organic. It's more buttery. It's just harder. It's not fake. So there are some tactile, actual physical properties to it, I think, that are really attractive as a painter. You can basically infinitely fix a oil painting. I mean, I think Michelangelo thought oil painting was strictly for amateurs because you could fix it, whereas he did fresco painting mostly, where you had to get it right the first time. You had to be a professional. But yeah, it's the color, the richness of the color, because you can glaze, you can put color down and then you can put transparent layers of paint on top and make the colors really rich. And, and when you varnish it at the end, there's this kind of enamel, beautiful depth to the color. On the other hand, it's toxic, slow drying, more expensive. And, but I'm willing to put up with that. The negative aspects are definitely counterbalanced by the positive aspects.
One thing I found interesting reading on your Instagram was you actually said that you like drawing more than painting. So, which is interesting because like your entire professional career has been painting. So,
yeah,
what is it about drawing that you like more?
It's the immediacy of it. Like I love painting, but the hard part for me is like I get so into applying the paint that I don't spend enough time on my palette. Like really good painters, like John Singer Sargent, like the best American portrait painter. He'd spend most of his time on his palette. Like he'd sit there and he'd look at the model, he'd mix paint, he'd get the value, he'd get the color right, he'd get it all set up, and then he'd go paint for a minute and then work on his palette for a long time. And I'm not good at that. I'm too impatient. I want to grab like an oil pastel or something and put the color down and have it come right out of the tube. You know what I mean? Because the palette is the intermediary between you and the actual application. And I'm not as comfortable on the palette. So I just love that feeling of I just grab whatever tool it is I need and just stick it on the page, and it's immediately making the marks that I want it to make. I think that's the main part. Plus, it's dry, or most of the mediums I use for drawing are dry. And it's easier to blend. With oil paint, it's sticky, gooey stuff, and it's just harder to actually work. Yeah, it's something about that.
If you enjoy drawing more, then why is it that you're predominantly doing oil and not drawing?
Well, everybody says that you can't sell drawings the same way you can sell paintings.
Do you believe that?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it might just be a myth, but apparently, I mean, the only thing I do is I do there's like a Moleskine show at Spoke Art where there's just all these great artists doing their drawings in sketchbooks, and then they get framed, which I love. That's my favorite show to do. I love doing that because it's that immediate thing. Yeah, I think I'm actually better at drawing too. Like, I think I'm just actually better at drawing than painting.
Do you want to do that more?
Well, I do draw in my paintings. So, I mean, obviously I start the paintings by drawing first. So there's a drawing, at least one layer of drawing underneath, which sometimes shows through. And then I draw on top of the paintings too, in like graphite, charcoal, and sometimes oil pastels and stuff on top of the drawing. But but that's mostly like sort of gestural, abstract mark making stuff to liven up the surface and make it less sort of kind of boring, just a normal painting. So I'll use drawing to kind of break that up. But yeah, I'm trying now to actually go more in that direction and do paintings that are more like a really finished, crazy charcoal drawing with some painting, but large amounts of charcoal drawings showing through the surface. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
It's actually where I'm going. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your studio practice. Do you have a dedicated studio space away from home?
I do. Yes. It's on the other side of the Bay Bridge. So like I used to have it in my apartment. I had my bedroom converted into a studio, and I could just never stay in there for a long period of time. I'd be in there and then I'd be like, yeah, I'll just go out and do something out in the apartment. So, and I teach in San Francisco and live in Oakland. So I'm over there until about 6 at night, usually on weekdays. That's when I finish teaching. So instead of getting stuck in a horrible traffic jam, I'll just go to my studio and work at night.
Oh, okay.
So it kind of it's nice location wise because it forces me to get the hell away. It's such a commitment to go there that I'm going to be there for like 5 or 6 hours, and there's nothing else around there really for me to distract me. And plus I go there after work. So that all works.
Okay. And what does your typical workday look like?
When I'm teaching, I teach usually from noon until 6. The mornings are reserved for like exercising and reading and business stuff. And then I teach for 6 hours, and then I go to the studio and I paint for as long as I can possibly do it, But that's hard. It's really hard after teaching's exhausting.
Sure. Yeah.
You just don't, it's not like there's so many people demanding your attention that your brain just gets overloaded, especially in an interactive drawing class where you're just running around helping people for 6 hours. But I've managed to figure out how to like take a tiny break, drink a whole shitload of caffeine, and then paint with, a modicum of effectiveness late at night.
What about when school's out of session?
Then I try to get over there around noon and paint until nighttime. Okay.
Wow. Do you find that you're more productive in your studio when school's out of session?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I've been on these awful schedules where I teach 5 days a week, which is just awful. And now I've set it up so I never teach Fridays. So I at least have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to paint for free. And it's very difficult to like just paint for one day and actually get into the mode. It almost takes me one day to just sort of get there, and then like another day of really good productive work. So when I'm off and I get these huge breaks in between semesters, like I'm on the whole month, I have all of January off.
Nice.
So that's when I actually really produce. That's when I can get in there and really work.
Do you tend to work on several pieces at the same time, or do you just focus on like one and then when that's done, move on?
It depends. I haven't had a solo show for a while. I don't know, a couple years, year and a half. So I've just been doing group shows. When I have group shows, I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to bang bang out this one painting for a group show. Then I kind of just focus on that, and then I move on and do the next one. While I'm doing that, I'm always working on I always have like a couple big giant paintings going that are more experimental, where I just kind of, have that there slowly developing as I finish the group stuff. I got a couple big ones on the walls right now, and I just sort of pick at them and work on them. They don't have any specific use or utility, and often they get cut up. Like a lot of times later on, I'll go in and just cut out sections of the paintings to use for smaller paintings.
What do you do with them? Like collage onto other paintings, or?
No, I'll just physically cut a chunk out of this giant painting and turn it into a smaller painting. I mean, I do that. It's actually something I learned from my teacher, Baron Story. He would do these giant drawings, and then he'd randomly crop it on a photocopier with like a frame. So he'd put this giant drawing down and then slide like a frame underneath it. And he couldn't even see where the frame was. And then he'd just make photocopies, and then he'd move the frame and make another one. And he'd pump out all these semi-randomized compositional things, which were really brilliant, because they'd force you to like not use the normal strategies and placements that you do when you're composing a design. And I find that like really difficult to get around. Like no matter how hard I try, it's almost like that I think I'm doing something different, and then I back up and I'm like, oh my God, that head's in the exact same place where it always is. You know what I mean? Like I'm always putting in these conventional, safe, normal places where figures and things are supposed to be in a painting. So I'm always trying to engage some kind of a randomizing process to figure out how to break that, So I'll do it in Photoshop too. I'll make big giant Photoshop collages, and then I'll randomly crop out all these chunks and then use those for paintings.
Do you tend to use Photoshop to work out your compositions beforehand?
Yeah, I mean, I sketch. I've always got a sketchbook where I'm working out thumbnails, writing down ideas, sketching. That's the most important place for me, is in an actual physical sketchbook. That's just from my training. You know what I mean? That's sort of it. I always have it with me. It's physical. I write everything down in it. It's sort of like it's like the true biography of an artist, in a sense, is their sketchbook. Everything else is kind of not what's actually happening. Then from that, I'll move to like image acquisition. So once I have an idea like that, I'll go and I'll either set up a giant photo shoot, or go online and find images that correlate with that particular idea I have, and I'll create big databases on my computer just full of all kind of potential images, and then I'll start combining images, composing, working in Photoshop. I'm very crude. I'm like, my Photoshop skills are legendarily bad. Like, I don't know any. I always want to keep it that way, because I really want to use it almost exactly like you would do actual physical collage. You know what I mean? Where it's not slick in any way, and I try not to let that show up in the painting, so it doesn't look like a slickly photoshopped collage that's then been painted realistically. I wanted to. So yeah, I have friends who cannot stand to watch me use Photoshop. they just start screaming. They're standing behind me going, "Oh my God, why are you doing it that way? Just press this button." I'm like, oh, whatever.
So after you work the composition out, you then draw it onto the canvas, or explain your process a little bit, I guess.
Yeah. So it goes like that. It goes from sketching in my sketchbook, and reading too. Like a lot of times I'll just be reading and writing down ideas. And that comes from my illustration training, where you were using text to generate images, because you were going to be illustrating a story or a book cover or a magazine article. So that's like a really powerful sort of way for me to start sketching, finding images, working in Photoshop. And then depending on how much time I have, sometimes I'll just draw like freehand from the Photoshop image. So in my studio, I've got like a big giant touchscreen monitor that's on a not a robotic arm, but sort of like a robotic arm that I can swing around. So I'll draw from that, and then sometimes I'll trace. I'll just print the thing out at size and put graphite on the back and just trace all the main shapes in there, and then start drawing on that, or project, too. Whatever. It depends on how much time I have. If I got an unlimited amount of time, I try to actually draw it. If I don't, I'll just trace it. And then, then painting begins.
Very cool. Let's talk a little bit about some of the themes that your work involves. You definitely deal with social themes a lot in your work. Everything from war to media to rampant consumerism. Do you feel like there's an inherent moral communicated in your work? Like, are you trying to prescribe a moral there, or is it more just observations and letting the viewer decide?
Yeah, I mean, I would hate to moralize. I'd hate to thump on my Bible and point fingers. I mean, it's definitely a critique of consumer culture, of capitalist imperialist consumer culture. But besides that, it's not. I don't think it's really. I'm trying not to moralize so much. It's more just trying to point out things that are hidden from the normal consciousness, trying to penetrate in some way using art to see through the surface of what's happening and try to see some of the historical social underpinnings for what's happening. Just to examine it, because I think it's like the most important thing is to bring things into the light, to expose them. Because power doesn't like to be seen. You know what I mean? When it does, it tends to wither away. And and not that I think that I actually don't think that art has much, especially painting. I don't think it has that much impact really on a large scale. If I ever changed anybody's mind or like made someone think in a different way, that would be amazing. You know what I mean? I mean, that would be the greatest thing an artist could ever do, I think.
Do you do a whole lot of research for your work?
I do. I read, I read a lot. I read history and philosophy and then fiction too, a lot. And, about psychology and I use a lot of that in my work as the basis for themes and for sort of, images and ideas. Yeah. So I do a lot of reading.
How do you not get overwhelmed by how toxic things have become?
Oh my God.
Or does it just like fuel your work even more?
Well, I feel a greater sense of urgency, you know what I mean, to really paint things that are relevant. I mean, the other important thing though, I think, is that as an artist, it's like if you're just painting what's happening now, the work will never persist. It'll never be it won't stay relevant for very long. There's some way to use like what's happening now to talk about themes that are more universal and ancient and trans, that are cross-cultural and point to sort of more eternal truths. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So but I think trying to do that using ancient imagery or ancient genres or, older genres is just really boring to me, which is what a lot of painters do. You know what I mean? They sort of do almost like things that look like old paintings. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but I would hope to be able to do a painting that's somehow timeless, but is also about what's happening now. You know what I mean? So it doesn't just look timeless because it's using people in robes.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're more motivated when times are bad, or just because you have a platform to react to it?
I don't know. They've been bad the whole time I've been painting. So I don't know what.
Do you have to be in a certain like frame of mind considering how powerful some of the things you deal with are?
Not really, because there's always, at any point in a painting, there's vast swaths of time that are just like busy work, that are purely technical. So a lot of times when you're painting, it's just kind of drudgery. It's just like you're just in there painting shapes. You know what I mean? It almost doesn't matter what you're doing. The subject matter is irrelevant. At some stage, it's, all that stuff is happening about themes and stuff, but at base, painting is abstract. It's like what you're actually doing is taking color and putting shapes on a flat surface. I could be painting a bowl of fruit or an abstract painting. It doesn't really matter. The considerations are the same. You know what I mean? So when I'm in that mode, I don't care. I almost don't care what I'm painting. Like I switch into this other mode of pure shape and pattern recognition and color and edges and form. And I might as well be abstract painting,
Okay.
Or painting a bowl of fruit or a landscape.
Do you find that meditative in some way? Just being able to zone out and focus on?
Yeah, I wish it could be. I get, especially painting. I don't trust. I never have trusted that I'm going to be able to get it right. I just, when I'm mixing the color, it's like, God, it's not right. I can't, how do I get that color? And I put it on and it's wrong and I get really frustrated. And then 4 or 5 hours of that, I back up and I'm like, oh, all right. Okay. That's actually okay. Then I can sleep at night. But yeah, the people who are, I can't fathom people who are like these fluid, they seem happy while they're painting, like they're actually enjoying the process. That never is the case for me. It is after a certain period, I guess. If it's going well and the paint's flowing and I've been doing it long enough, I'm not really conscious of what's happening.
Okay. For
sure. Yeah. That's the ideal, state.
You're not even shooting for happiness. You're just shooting for, I can sleep at night.
That's yeah. I mean, it's amazing too, how unbelievably satisfying it is to have rendered like a section of drapery like really, really well.
Nice.
You back up and you're like, wow, okay, that's good. That's three-dimensional. There's form there. It's so satisfying to render form well, to get it right is it's really rewarding. And then I can go home and be like, all right, I made something today.
So many of the themes that you deal with are very worldly, just by their nature. And the fact that you lived abroad for a while, do you feel like having that experience gave you a more well-rounded view of like the world?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Especially living in America, I feel like we're so isolated in living in this little bubble of exceptionalism, bubble of consumerism. I mean, what do we even know? I mean, okay, there's this giant country right above us called Canada, and I don't think it's in anybody's consciousness that it exists, And then God forbid going south where there's, you're trying to build a wall to keep even our awareness of Mexico out. But in Europe, it's like you can't be like that. You've been invaded by that one country 20 times, and you've invaded them. Yeah, there's a much greater understanding of history as well, It just, because it's in your face. Like I was in Budapest. I did a residency in Budapest like 2 years ago. And there was like Roman ruins, and then like ancient buildings and then communist blockhouses with giant letters on them, like in an Orwell novel, all within the same block, all right next to each other, and everyone was just like, it was just the normal thing to understand that there was these strata of history, these deep layers of history. I think in America, we live in like a 10-second meme, viral meme window of awareness.
Yeah, no, that's so true. What I understand is your mother actually studied Tibetan Buddhism in Nepal for several years.
Yeah.
Does you feel that Eastern philosophy had an influence on you as well?
It's funny, but like your your parents' religion is always like you always poo-poo your parents' religion. So it's pretty funny. Like I was always like, I don't like Tibetan Buddhism. It's got too many rituals and ceremonies. It's like I'm into Zen Buddhism, which is more stripped down, So I had this teenage attitude towards my mom's Buddhist practice, which is really very silly, but but yeah, I mean, I read like Alan Watts and all that stuff when I was a kid, so I was really into Eastern religion, but only as like a sort of a romantic idea, maybe. I didn't really practice. I mean, I meditate now. I do yoga and meditation and Chinese martial arts and stuff. So the proof is in the pudding. Like what really matters with that stuff is actually meditating every day for 15 or 20 minutes. Otherwise, it's all just talking. And then the other person that I read a lot who was really important for me was Joseph Campbell, people kind of poo-poo him a little bit, but once I read him, I realized, that every culture has these same ideas. Like even Western culture, I just hated Christianity and all that monotheistic stuff, but all those good ideas are in there somewhere, deeply buried under a bunch of nonsense, but they're there.
You mentioned martial arts a few times. Let's talk a little bit about that. What discipline have you primarily been focused on?
Well, I did a bunch of kind of bogus martial arts for a long time. I did not bogus, but I did Taekwondo and I did karate and a bunch of stuff, and it was all cool, but it was all pretty abstract in terms of actually fighting or anything with it. And sort of, it's weird. Like if you go to a school, you'll meet people who will be like at a higher level, or they'll be more sort of hardcore, and they'll be like, oh, you got to go to this class. You should go over here and train with this guy. And then you go there, and then that gets more intense. And then there's like people there who are like, oh yeah, you're pretty good. You should go do this. And eventually you're like, oh my God, I'm in a ring somewhere fighting some guy full contact. So I somehow I actually managed to get up to the point where I was competing like full contact kickboxing.
So was that something you started when you were a kid?
Yeah. I did every kid. I went to a Mick dojo and studied Mick martial arts and wore my uniform and showed up to class and bowed and was super respectful and like this sort of ideal little martial arts kid. But I never really fought or anything. And then finally, like I just started training. So I trained at this school called EBM, which is Evolving Body Mind. And it's like a Chinese-based martial arts school, but the teacher teaches boxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, Thai boxing, and then we compete in a sport called Sancho, which is it's basically like mixed martial arts without ground fighting.
Okay.
So you can do throws, takedowns, kicks, punches, and knees, and and we had six national champions in our school. I won the national championship in 2001. Yeah.
Very cool. Is that something you're still involved with today? Do you like still train?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I was just yesterday. I was in a 2.5 hour brutal sparring class where I had to end up taking one of the students to the hospital afterwards.
Oh wow.
Yeah. I was teaching the class, and someone did a throw, and someone didn't land right, and we're in the emergency room at Kaiser for a few hours. They're okay. They'll be all right.
And you also play the guitar, or used to play. Is that something you still do?
Oh yeah. I still play. I was in bands in high school and in college. There's hilarious photographs of me with big hair and leather pants. And I was in like a kind of prog rock band where we had like 20-minute guitar solos that were all orchestrated with things nobody could dance to. So
were you out gigging? Like, were you doing gigs and stuff?
Yeah, we played gigs and stuff. Yeah, we were pretty serious. We lived in a warehouse and practiced and did gigs and, went to studios but it never really went anywhere.
Very cool. And I hear you play chess also. I'm a big chess guy. Did you try to play chess like an hour a day, something like that?
Something about like that. And first thing in the morning, I'll make a cup of tea and then play chess online for like 30 minutes.
Okay. That was what I was going to ask. Was it something online, or is it something you do with people in your studio? Or
I play online, but if I find someone who wants to play, I love to play in person. So I do. There's a few people I play with, but mostly online. But not, I play against computers sometimes, but usually against people.
Right on. How do you have time to do all these things? You seem to do all the things.
Well, like I said, I don't teach until noon. So like I get up, play chess for a while, read, answer emails, work out for an hour, go to school, teach, go paint until I fall asleep. And then I just do that again the next day. I think being a productive artist requires routine. And that the only way you can make innovative art is to have your life structured in a very routine way, or at least to make a lot of innovative art. I think you really have to be kind of boring in your personal life. I think Oscar Wilde said he never met an interesting great poet. All the great poets he met were just boring people who did nothing but write great poetry.
What do you think it is that is sort of required?
It's time. You have to create space around yourself for that creative energy and structure to really be unconstrained. So like my grandfather, he was sort of my role model in this. He wrote 50 novels.
Wow.
He wrote one novel a year for 50 years.
Jeez.
Yeah, all of them published, and hundreds of short stories and articles and nonfiction books. And his routine was just inevitable. Like as inevitable as the sun was going to rise the next morning. He was going to get up, eat breakfast, and go to his studio, his office, and write until lunch, and then eat lunch, and then write until dinner, which is like 8 o'clock, and then stop, But he would even like go into his office and not write anything. He was thinking about what he was going to write. Like some days he wouldn't actually, maybe he'd write a sentence or two, but he would just sit at his desk with a typewriter, a bunch of paper and some notes and nothing else. No music, nothing else to read, no television, nothing. And he would literally sit there for 6 hours at a chair. And if he didn't write anything, he still sat there.
Oh, wow.
Just waiting, being there present, being there in the moment with the tools that you need every day, and if nothing happens, it doesn't happen. But if you're not there, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then he told you now it's time to leave.
I know. That's like the only thing he's ever said to me. Because he had to go back. He was like, now it's time for you to leave because I'm going back into my office to write. But I think the landscape of artists' lives are littered with the casualties of their obsession with working. You know what I mean? Relationships, families. It's problematic, and I don't think it's maybe not necessary for many people. You know what I mean? But for me, it's like I have to like really create these crazy boundaries around myself to like be able to get all that done. And it's probably selfish. You know what I mean? It's probably really selfish, and I don't know if it's really necessary, but that's just how I roll.
Let's talk a little bit about the recent 1X Run Decade collection that you have. So it includes pieces from 2009 to 2019.
Yeah.
And you said that they are examples of my best work as I progress and experiment. How did this project come about? What's the background there?
Well, I've been working with 1X Run for a while, since I guess 2012 or something. And usually I do print runs with them. And then occasionally we'll do a print run that coincides with selling some originals as well. And this time they didn't like any of my any of my paintings for print. So we decided to just do a big show of originals. Yeah, and then I just went through the stuff that I had, and sent them like a whole bunch of stuff, and we sort of went through and curated it and figured out which things sort of exemplified the progress I've made in the last 10 years. So you can sort of see it. Like if you look at the paintings chronologically, it's pretty easy to see the subtle shifts in color and style and technique and stuff, which is kind of interesting.
And then looking at that in sort of an introspective way, how do you feel that your work has evolved?
Well, I don't know if it's evolved. It's changed. I suffer from the creeping suspicion that I was better before. I'm terrified that that's the case. That I've lost whatever it was that was the, I don't know, because you see that in so many artists. Like there's like one, there's got their youthful stuff and they're still learning, and then it starts to get good, and there's like one chunk of their productivity where it's just awesome, where everything's just, it's your favorite part, and then they start doing other stuff and it just doesn't, it's not as cool. So yeah, I don't know if it's getting better, but I was taught correctly or incorrectly by the teachers that I studied with that to be an artist you had to keep seeking. You had to question, not just the art of the day as it stands, but your own art, your own process, and your own output. And so there's so many artists who are very successful who have a very strict parameters on their style, where it changes a little bit, but it's very similar work. And that's like branding. It's really smart. I mean, if you want to be a smart, successful artist, it's like you need to find a style and a subject matter that is really recognizable, and then you got to brand yourself and you got to stick with that. And I sort of do, I've got that collage-y political content, consumer culture critique thing that is recognizable. But I think a real sort of commercial deficit is that I kind of jump around too much. You know what I mean? And it's a principle jumping around though. It's not just like trying a whole bunch of different stuff. It's like looking at what you've done up to that point and trying to move it in some direction.
It's very intentional.
Yeah. And then to see where it goes, because it doesn't always go in a good place. Sometimes it goes somewhere and it's awful, but it's different, and it's allowing you to explore the sort of space of possibilities around where your style is at any moment. You want to move it and see, what's possible. And I mean, but that's actually, it's like an ethos, you know what I mean? It's like a underlying thing that I was taught that that's what an artist is supposed to be doing. You're not supposed to make paintings that sell. You're supposed to be this questioning thing that kind of, and sometimes it doesn't work.
What do you have coming up in 2020? Anything you can share?
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's see. I'm trying to put a show together with Joram Roeks, who's a great artist from the Netherlands. And we've been talking we had a 3-person show together like a few years ago, like 4 years ago or 5 years ago. And then we're trying to do a 2-person show somewhere, maybe in Europe. And then I have a solo show at 111 Minna Gallery in San Francisco in November. And for that this is like a show I've been thinking about for a long time. And it's going to be like portraits of cosplay designers and models who are like constructing their identity through these costumes and these persona that they're taking on, expressing themselves through that. And it's sort of about how we construct identity and gender and race in our culture, and that these people are like taking it, they're just exemplifying this ability, this more modern sensibility about that it's okay to like experiment with your identity, that you could say, okay, I feel like I don't have a gender, and then you could be like, okay, I feel like now I'm female, and now maybe I'm not, you know what I mean? And that we don't have to have this essentialist, but completely biologically based view of like what determines who a person is. That it's okay for people to kind of find out who they are. I mean, everybody does it anyways in their own lives. You know what I mean? Everybody experiments to some extent. But anyway, so I feel like it's just a really powerful way to show that. So it'd be sort of like traditional portraiture of them, like Renaissance type portraiture of them, but in their costumes. And I want to collaborate with them to show themselves in a way that best exemplifies that aspect of their self. And I want to do like different ethnicities, different body types, cross-gendered cosplay, as well as like really sexy, beautiful cosplay people too, because that'll. And then I'm going to try to get as many of them as possible to come to the opening of the show, so they can sort of be in the space with the paintings.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. So do you typically get these are like models that you actually, hire to do photographs and stuff? Yep.
So I'm going to go to some conventions, and I've already got a network of some cosplay people I've worked with in the past, just doing like group shows and stuff. So I've done a couple portraits like that before. Yeah. So I set it up, shoot them, or they could, if they're not available, they could take the photographs themselves. But I want it to be collaborative, and because I know, like in that sort of community, they have a lot of guidelines and a lot of stuff going on that I want to respect.
For sure, yeah.
And yeah, I think it would be cool.
That's awesome. How big of a show is it going to be?
111 Min is like a pretty big gallery. They've got 2 rooms, so there are going to be 2 solo shows opening at the same time. One's going to be a female artist that we haven't figured out who it's going to be yet. But yeah, it'd probably be like 20 paintings. And I might maybe do one that's got, or a couple that's got more than one person in it. Do some group things, like some paintings with a bunch of, like they make a team.
Dynamic duo.
Exactly.
Very cool. All right. Well, we're getting towards the end now. Where can people find you online?
You can find me on my website, which is adamhuntercaldwell.com. AdamCaldwell.com. I let lapse.
Oh, really? You had it at one point?
I had it. I let it lapse for a day, and it's now owned by a corporation in the Cayman Islands that want $10,000 for me to get it back. And I've been I go there every couple months, and I'm like, God damn it, they still have it. They want $10,000 for it. It's so stupid.
Wow.
Yeah, and at Adam Hunter Caldwell on Instagram, and Adam Hunter Caldwell and Adam Caldwell on Facebook.
All right. Awesome. Well, one last question, and this is something that I ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
Oh. Probably Brett Amory. Amory. Yeah. I think he's a really important artist. He's that friend of mine who just went to Stanford to study. And yeah, he's had a really, really amazing career and is like a really relentless explorer, and to the point where he basically sort of stopped a very promising commercial career to just go back to school for 2 years.
Yeah, that's amazing.
To learn. Yeah, he's a great musician too.
What instrument?
He plays drums. Yeah, he's in a band called Flat Black. They're like a sludge rock or something. I don't even know what kind of sludge metal.
Very cool. All right, well, Adam, thanks a ton for coming on today, dude. It's been great talking to you.
Oh, cool. Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Adam. One of the things that really struck me while I was preparing for this interview and then talking to Adam is just how varied his life experience has been. You know, he grew up in New England with a mother who studied Tibetan Buddhism in Nepal and a grandfather who wrote novels about social issues. Eventually moving to Oakland, where he worked all sorts of odd jobs, but then finally decided he wanted to really clean up his act and make a go of the art thing. Ended up getting a scholarship and double majoring. And while he was at art school, he started teaching art as well, which he's done for 20 years. He's practiced and competed in martial arts, he plays the guitar, chess, and that's all in addition to creating art for galleries. The dude's had an incredibly full life, and I think that really shows in the art that he creates. He takes all of these varied ideas and blends them together in order to speak about some pretty powerful themes. About war, about consumerism and the media, in a way and a style that's as eclectic as his own life. So thanks again to Adam for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I really appreciate your support. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any suggestions for the show, or if there's a guest you want me to try and have on. I'd love to hear any feedback you might have for me. You can contact me through my website at artaffairespodcast.com, and like I said at the front of the show, you can go there to check out any previous episodes. You can also find the show on Instagram and Facebook at Art Affairs Podcast. And last but not least, if you're on Apple Podcasts, I'd really be grateful if you took a moment to rate and review the show. It's such a great way to get the word out. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.